Hey, my name is Enda Murray and I'm the director of the Irish Film Festival. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Ciarán Cassidy, who is the writer and director of the delightful documentary Housewife of the Year. Ciarán, you're very welcome to our Q&A.
Thanks very much for having us, and thanks very much for screening the film.
Brilliant. Tell us how did this the idea for the documentary develop? What?
Well, I suppose it was two-pronged. I think one of the things was when I was growing up in Cavan Town, there was a woman, and she was on the road behind me, and she was a contestant in this. Uh, and I think the show and how big it was at the time stuck in my head because it was a huge event. She was in the local papers, everybody was talking about it. So I think the show was kind of forgotten, but I think it was there gnawing away at my subconscious. And I know that we were you're always as a documentary looking at ways to explore stories. And the fact that this kind of really rich, bountiful archive existed, especially the 80s stuff where they went out and stayed with people in their houses and they filmed in film, we thought there was an opportunity possibly to be able to, tell this generation's story. And what happened was there's a woman in the film that you just seen, and she's called Bernie. So we got 1988 and we tried to make a trailer and we were looking through and we were looking for who is speaking here that's a bit self-deprecating, who would be a really good subject. And we thought Bernie sounded good. And we went down to her house in Wexford. She said, I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told before. And she completely got what we were trying to do, which was tell a story of women in Ireland through this show. And then she told us the story that's in the film about her getting pregnant at 16 and being scared that she was going to win, or she could win and she was going to be exposed in the show. And I think that was really, it started off with a small acorn of my neighbor, but it kind of grew. But once we were leaving Bernie's house, we kind of knew we had a film on our hands.
Grant, because that was going to be my next question. At what point did you go from going, this could work to kind of deciding you're going to push ahead with this film?
Yeah, well, I think it was I think the thing with it was we felt we wanted to tell these women's stories, but we weren't sure. We as journalists, we knew that everybody's got a story, and yourself. If you threw a blanket over where you coming from, Drogheda, you'd find stories and all around from each people. People live interesting lives, and we were pretty confident that. But what we wanted to do was just get buy-in from the contestants, and it was a really weird experience because none of the archive existed, and I think a lot of them thought we were pranking them when we were contacting them at first. But we built up this database and we're sending out letters, and the letters were like, oh, do you think, do you remember being on this show, could we talk to you? And then we went down and they were just very, very trusting because they were all telling hugely personal stories, hugely open to us. And I think some people would have thought that we were just trying to find that balance, but they didn't know how it was going to turn out, and it all sounded a little bit surreal and a bit wacky. The idea, oh, we're going to tell the history of women through this period of time, through this show that you appeared in. But all of the ex-contestants really kind of bought in, and they really gave a lot of themselves and of their own personal stories in those interviews. And it was just on that journey that we kind of began to sense that there was something kind of special happening with it.
Yeah, because actually you've covered a couple of my questions there. Was when you met these these women, how did you get them to open up and to reveal stories like the lady in Wexford? As you say, they revealed a lot about themselves. But how did you manage to get that trust?
I think there was a couple of things that we were doing at which, I always make this joke. This is the Irish Film Festival in Australia, so I say there could be some Irish people in the audience. And if there's some Australians beside them, let me explain. Irish people are terrible to make documentaries about. They're not terrible, but they are. Let me just say, you would understand about this, and where I think people would say about notions, and they'd be very self-conscious about how they appear. And I think so if you turn around and say you're doing a documentary and you're going to follow somebody and they're going to go down to their local shop and buy cigarettes, and then they're going to go to a pub, they'd be mortified. They'd be mortified about what they're doing. Where if you went to America and you said, I'm going to do this in the documentary, they'd be like, oh yeah, no bother. And they'd be going into the shop and they'd be doing, I can't speak for Australians anyway. what what I would find with these women, what you don't understand about them, for anybody who's Australian who's sitting in the audience, and it's a kind of flashback for the Irish there. This show was going out when there was only two channels in the whole country, and they were both owned by the same station, so there was no competition. So this was the biggest show in town, and everybody was watching it on a prime time Saturday night. And these women were not appearing on this show; it was live, and they were on a stage in front of like a massive audience. So I think like by those categories, when you start kind of like looking at who they were huge, giant type A personalities who actually were in some ways, because they had done these kind of massive, media Everest, and I'm sure, everybody would feel a bit uncomfortable with doing live TV in front of a live audience when everybody's watching. But so I think there was that. And then I think when you're asking the question about like how we got buy-in, I think with some people, like we contacted them and they weren't sure what we were doing and they didn't, like they weren't comfortable and they didn't take part. And some people gave us videotapes that they had, but they didn't want themselves to be featured in it. But for the vast majority of the women, I think they understood what we were trying to say. I think they felt that there was a kind of, they had been on a journey, and they wanted to tell that story. And I think for some of them, I think they felt comfortable. Like, I don't know if we'd have contacted them 20 years ago, whether they would have done it if, parents had been still alive or, issues like that, where I think they, like the country itself, they'd gone on this kind of process. And I think they felt that they were comfortable and they were happy to talk about that. But we were always kind of never kind of pushing people in to tell stuff that they didn't want to tell out there. And I think they just kind of were all very, very comfortable with the stories that they were telling. They were kind of proud. And I think for somebody like say with, Ina, I think she, talked about the shame that she felt, and she talked about how she was made feel from being in a religious institution, how she felt into Irish society. And I think with the film, I think putting it up there and then seeing people's reactions after screenings actually meant an awful lot to her. So I think there was a kind of a process there for people where they were unashamed of who they were, and they were happy to put their story out there. And I think then it did gain a response.
Yeah, I remember the first time I kind of came across it was in Galway last year at the Fla, and all the ladies were on the steps with their sashes, and they were all having a ball. And I thought, well, this is a really interesting film. How did you track down the people? What kind of a detective work did you have to do?
Yeah, it was kind of mad because there was no existing, like it wasn't like that there was an old office where it was like Housewife of the Year. We went in and they just gave us their database. So producer Maria Horgan and then the executive producer Colin McKeown, there was kind of an exhaustive process between us where we built up this database. So Maria was going into the National Library and she was kind of just taking down the names of all the contestants. So there'd be 6 finalists each year, and we were targeting for finalists. And we'd only go after editions that we found the archive. But it was a real chicken and egg scenario, because what happened is that by the time, like, the show was from 78 on up to, like, let's say 82 up to 94, VHSs were then fairly readily available. So like if you were going to be appearing on a massive show, everybody had a VHS of this. So even though this particular episode may not have been saved in the RTE archives, when we were sending out these letters, people would say, "Oh, I don't want to be in your documentary," but they would say, "I do have a VHS of it." And we were able to use those VHSs and build up a kind of database of footage. Also, then with it, we were just sending out letters. So Ireland, I don't know what it's like in Australia. It's completely there's loads of scam calls, and it's usually aimed at elderly people, so they weren't answering the phones. So we were just sending out these letters. So like say one of the women in the film is Miriam, and Miriam Harrington. And the thing with Miriam is she got married for a second time, so her name changed and her address changed and whatnot. But we couldn't locate her. But when she was on stage, when she was talking to Gay Byrne, she talked about, "Oh, I do pen pals." So I just wrote, I just said, like, well, they probably know her in the post office if she's been doing pen pals. So I just wrote Miriam Harrington, Castletown Bear, pen pals. And the letter got to her, even though her name had changed and had been 25 years or 30 years. So it was kind of a bit random. It was all a bit, we got a phone number off somebody, or we'd find a daughter on Facebook, or but there was a kind of slow process of just building it up, and we're just never sure of who would have stories. So we wanted to contact and chat to as many people as we could for it.
Wow, that sounds like Murphy the Spy. Um, um, that's an incredible story. I was very impressed by the tone that you got in the film, because I thought, Housewife of the Year, it's a very easy type of thing to criticize and to lampoon, but you went beyond that, and you respected the women and the women's stories, and gave that understanding of what a huge thing it was for them. Were there any other memories that you have from the shoot that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, it's kind of funny you just mentioned the tone, because like that was something that we really wanted to get right, but it was really a delicate balance, because there's parts of the film like it is kind of like like there's parts of the archive that are quite funny, where you have like Derek Davis eating the broccoli and complaining, and people always laugh at that, or they might laugh at that the prize was a cooker and stuff like that. But we also just didn't want, and we knew that after about 3 or 4 minutes, people would be disgusted at this. It was just kind of laughing at this archaic old show and how the treatment of women. And what we felt was the only people who should appear in the film is the women themselves. And I think by that power, we were able to get the balance, which was like, I think Irish people are quite funny, and we wanted to get that humor in, and we wanted to get the laughter in. And like, somebody like Ellen, who is the woman that went back to school, like she had these two very stark stories. And that story where she was sent back to it, it's really hard. And I can always feel like the oxygen being sucked out of the cinema screening when she talks about being sent because of the pharmacist's letter. But she's actually a riot of a person. She is hilarious, good crack, always stuff going on. So we really wanted at the end to include that photo of, or that kind of thing about her going back to school, just to kind of capture her personality. And also, like, when she's standing up in the front of on the dresser and she goes, "Oh, what an Egypt," or whatnot. It was just like, that's who she is. And she is this kind of really fantastic, great crack, fun to be around personality. And we wanted to kind of capture all that. So we just didn't want it to be sad stories. We didn't want to be laughing, and we wanted to kind of capture who they were. And I suppose you're asking there just about like what jumped out of us. I don't know. Like it was kind of, I think maybe it was the reaction of it. It was a really profound and positive rollout of the reaction here in Ireland. But even with somebody like, I think one of the women, she was talking like she was going through a tough time, and the film had come out, and she was like at every screening up in Belfast and down in Cork and over in Kerry. And I remember at the screening, she just got up and she said, "Oh, like this has given me the best fill up, that I've had in the last couple of years," because I think she had suffered a couple of personal bereavements. And I think it was just that. I think there was a real camaraderie between all the women who were featured in it, and they were all really proud about how it turned out. So it did become this, yeah, like I think it was recognition of that generation, and like I think all of us in the team, we were all using our own personal compasses. Like my mum was a housewife, and like that was like, I think when I was 12, she went back and entered the workforce because she actually just found that she was just kind of getting like I think she was just finding it, kind of boring isn't the right word, but I think she was just struggling at home on her own. She'd moved into a new town, Cavan Town. She was just there on her own, and she went back and did a FOSS course trying to enter the workforce. So, and I know Colin had his background, and I know Maria, but these were just a kind of our own personal compasses. But I think when we went in and we met all the women in their houses, like genuinely, because sometimes you can find people you're making subjects and they're pains, and it's really tedious, and you're trying to set up shoots. They were just all so warm. They were also welcoming, but they all had like these amazing full existence. And we were all kind of really, really impressed by them. And I think like it was a really strong cast. So it was a real privilege to kind of be on the road with them afterwards and see the reaction that people had. And I think it was a reaction to them, but also like, we had screenings and people would be crying, or people would be coming up to you. And I think what it was is because you have like, I think there's 12 women in the film. I think people just see their own family in it. They see people that they know. They see that generation, and it's very recognizable because that generation of women had a particular set of circumstances, that changed with the marriage bar and with other things later.
Yep. What were the major challenges for the production in making of the film?
I say it was like, I think there was like, I think one of the things that you're kind of touching on that I think was really tough was just like that tone and that balance, because it was just mad, like it is mad. And we wanted to, like, the show itself is kind of a bit, helter skelter and a bit like it's very crazy. So if somebody's Australian watching this, they won't understand about who Derek Davis is and what's eating broccoli, or like, like some of the items that are going on, like who Gay Byrne is. But for us, like, it was a real hallucinogenic trip into 1980s Ireland at times. And I think for us, it was trying to balance that. So, like, when you're doing an edit, you have something like where Ellen is sent to the mother or the Magdalene laundry. And then, like, you're like, how do I move? So, like, we have a cooking montage, and it just would seem too absurd. It seemed too crazy. So it was kind of a case of like we were trying to like wield all these narratives together. So on one, it's the story of the show, and then I think on another thing, it's the story of these women. So like we have like I think the film really opens with Ina, being born, and then I think Bernie has a child, and then Margaret's child at the end is the one who she changes her opinion. So you have these kind of three stages that that they're going through, and that's on a kind of fairly subconscious level. But then also you're trying to bring in all of these kind of things that we felt just were kind of illustrative of what the show was about, and captured what it was like for them to be appearing on it, but also in a weird way made it more challenging to edit it together. So like one of the examples was like most of the women that we featured were happy enough, like enjoyed being on the show. So there was a real contradiction that they were quite critical of Ireland, quite critical of the disadvantages and the inequality and how women were treated, but also they found that this was a really exciting, a journey that they went on, that they were on live TV, that they met Gay Byrne, that all their neighbors had bonfires out. So like we wanted it to be true to what their representation, not what my representation of it is. So we trying to balance all that stuff. And so there was a lot of cuts where we didn't want to seem that it was like laughing. We didn't want to seem that it was earnest. But we want to kind of just get that balance.
A question: how was it received? It played in cinemas in Ireland. What was the response?
It was great. Like I think the film has done like for a film about a kind of obscure Irish TV show, it's done great. It premiered in CPH in Copenhagen, which is a great festival. It won the documentary award in Galway, where you were there, Enda. And then I think it was released in cinemas, and it got great critical and public response. So I think like the reviews, I think everybody really understood what we were trying to do with it, which was kind of tell sensitively but poignantly the story of a generation, but also exposing the kind of the darkness that existed within Irish society. But also, like, I just think there was a generation of Irish women that went to the cinema. So I went down to a screening. I think it was like one Monday night, and there was all these kind of rural screenings. And I went in, and it must have been about 70 or 80 women in at the screening, and they were all over 55 or 60. And they all really responded to the film. So it just had a brilliant kind of like it just kind of I think it hit a lot of demographics. It was in the IFI, it was in the Lighthouse, but it did really well. It sold out when it was doing all those kind of rural screenings as well. So it was a really positive release to be part of.
I'm just going to ask you quickly your latest project. Can you say anything about the project with Steak Knife?
Oh, Steak Knife. Oh yeah. Well, Steak Knife was just released there. It was out in BBC Sounds. It was a podcast series that I did with producer Mark Horgan. So I think anybody who's in your audience who's into the podcast, it was about IRA, the kind of IRA enforcer, a guy who was meant to go around finding touts or informers, but actually he turned out to be the main informer to British intelligence, and he operated in that role from mid 70s all the way up to early 90s. So a lot of people died who shouldn't have, and it was a very, very dark episode in the intelligence war, where just local nationalist communities were kind of ravaged by what would be fairly underhand kind of tactics. But it's available on BBC Sounds.
And what are you working on at the moment?
We have Little Wing Films is the production company that we run here in Dublin. And so we currently are working on a feature film, which is going into production now. It's done with Screen Ireland and BBC. and it's about I don't know really how much I can fully say about it at this moment in time, but it's about quite incredible story that existed in Ireland from the 1970s all the way up to the present day. And we've kind of got access with this group, and it's a project that we've been working on since maybe 2016. So it kind of gives you a kind of hint, like just about how long these projects exist, that they can be, developing over a course of, like, I think the average for a film is now 7 years.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Ciarán. It's been great chatting to you, and I could talk for another while, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Good luck with Housewife of the Year, and good luck with the projects in the future. Thanks for taking part.
And thanks for the screening and everybody for going tonight. Thank you very much.